It's just crazy. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. Now, meanwhile, I mentioned how they're having a meeting not only about NATO, but about the developing world, how to do the financing. That means the IMF, that means the World Bank, that means the U.S. Agency for International Development. Who is on this list?
Oh, the Prince. Oh.
Well, I've got the U.S., the development guy right here. David E. Bell, Administrator, Agency for International Development. They were there, they talked about it, they used that for population control and all the rest of it. Do we want to go over more of the list or get to the other?
Keep going, whatever you want. Stream's working fine, right, Rob?
I believe so, yeah.
Check it.
Zbigniew Brzezinski, 1966.
Zbigniew Brzezinski, 1966.
He called the world his grand chessboard, strategized how to put us all in war so they could encircle Russia. Totally crazy plan. And here he is in 1966.
And then if we don't want war with Russia, we're supposedly working for Russia. No, Russia's got its own problems. These globalists are the ones ruining my life. Banker bailouts, drones, checkpoints. They're the ones killing my country. They're the foreigners too. Okay, let's deal with them first. Then you want to get the Russians, fine. This is the enemy. This is the enemy.
And again, this is 1966. 10 years later in the Carter administration, the entire administration was 100% trilateral commission, started by David Rockefeller, who attended Bilderberg from the very beginning, never missed a meeting, or if he did, it was only due to personal issues or something. Robert R. Bowie, we talked about him. He wrote the big NATO document this year. And there's all kinds of people on here. Standard Oil, again, that's the Rockefellers. Sullivan and Cromwell, that was Allen Dulles, both Dulles brothers actually, their law firm, which again, they worked inside Harriman Banking, and they were advisors to him, etc. And it's just all here. The Heinz Company, Henry J. Heinz, another skull and boneser. He was the father of the former husband, Heinz III, who married Teresa Heinz, who later married John Kerry, the skull and bones, who was at the beginning.
And again, you got stuff in here about cutting off third world development. I mean, we're just beginning to get into these. It's just incredible.
Yeah, so let's move on to that. Here's part of the documents from Joseph A. Redinger, who gave Prince Bernhard the idea to found.
Yeah, helped set it up, and that's the Vatican connection. You gotta admit the Vatican was involved in this heavily. If you go back to the Treaty of Rome, 1957.
These are some of the invitation letters, again in this case to Senator Fred Harris. Notice the letterhead from First City National Bank, the letterhead from Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. These are the people running Bilderberg on the U.S.
I want to go
side.
slowly over these. This is important. This is internal annal, Bilderberg meetings, Joseph Redinger. From a collection of the senator. Don't get these mixed up.
Oh, no.
Let me show this. First National Bank, the invite. Here's all a corporate network, you notice. Controlling government, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which they actually mean is total war. That came out in the different congressional hearings.
Peace is war. That sounds like 1984.
That's what Anthony Sutton came out with. Tell folks about Carnegie.
Well, Carnegie, just like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and several others, are totally treasonous. They investigated them in the 50s. They found they were undermining us through education and many other avenues. They were able to bankroll so many programs and thus steer the agenda. And they still do.
And again, folks, this comes out of a national archive of restricted information of a senator's private archive of Bilderberg meetings. 1966. That's where all of this, look at this, assistant to the president, all of this, because they said Carnegie works for the presidency, and then the president works for the private interest.
We're talking about Joseph E. Johnson, president of Carnegie.
So Carnegie itself works for the president. Remember, that's what the congressional document said.
So again, the first agenda item, NATO, we covered that policy paper. Here's the other policy paper, the future of world economic relations, especially between industrial and developing countries. This one written by J. Tenberger of Rotterdam in 1966, outlines their plans using the U.S. Agency for International Development. We just covered that. The OECD is very important in that. The
Organization of Economic Cooperative Development.
Thank you. That ties in with the Marshall Plan and the U.S. hegemony over Europe, again trying to build the European community. And then here you have a press release from the IMF, again showing how it ties in with the policy.
They make the call, then it's put out as policy.
Right. And this one happens to predate, but it's the same basic issues. And again, population control is in these documents. I'll try to find it.
You had it earlier. Just go over it.
Well, we've got the food problem, the impact of population explosion, all the billions, and they're trying to make sure the European countries are going to commit to their target donations so they can give them to the developing world, but not give them to the developing world, give it to them with incredibly damaging strings. This has been exposed by John Perkins. It's been exposed in documentaries like Life Plus Debt, doing a case study on Jamaica.
Well, they make you get sterilized, or they make you only, the money only goes to globalist corporations. We're told it's aid, but it's actually just going to globalist corporations within the countries. Then they don't industrialize them, which would actually reduce their population, and actually lets their population balloon. It's totally cold-blooded.
Well, they send the money.
When they see peace, they mean war.
Exactly, and usually it does deal explicitly with population control. When it doesn't, it deals with building up infrastructure, which is only to be handed to the corporations. It's never to build up the country. There's always very troubling strings attached. They know they can't repay the debt. It's just a whole scheme. Again, we just covered how important one person, John J. McCloy, is. He was the head of the World Bank. The IMF head always comes from Europe. That's part of the Atlantic Partnership agreement they worked out before the end of World War II. Before the end of World War II at the Bretton Woods in 1944.
Any more on these documents?
Well, it just goes on and reiterates the food problem and the population explosion. Again, that ties into Henry Kissinger, who always goes to Bilderberg, and the food as a weapon from 1974. And it ties back to the 1949 Royal Commission on Population and all
right, let's continue. But again, they're demonizing national sovereignty because we can control our own lives, and they want NATO as the world army. It's all in there.
Now, I've tried to explain to you how important the wise men is. Again, it's Dean Acheson, Charles Bolin, W. Averill Harriman, extremely important, worked directly with, really was the boss of Prescott Bush, who of course led to the very damaging Bush dynasty, George F. Kennan, and Robert A.
Sure. It's part of a corrupt ruling class that are eugenicists. Continue.
Well, you've got policy papers here from 1966, again in Congress, and subcommittees from Dean Acheson, one of the wise men. Again, McCloy there at the Bilderberg meeting. His buddy Acheson comes out with a policy paper that reflects the NATO.
The Atlantic Alliance, which is really the covert merger of our government under foreign corporate control. Total treason.
That's it. It's a covert merger. And the reason I brought up Wiseman was to show how someone, a top diplomat like Dean Acheson, would be taking marching orders from someone like John J. McCloy, who had so many important positions. Now, this is very interesting. Walter P. Reuther, head of United Auto Workers Union.
This is the key, showing that even in the 60s, the biggest union head, it was all staged. He was at Bilderberg.
And we're looking at a letter from Senator Fred Harris, again, who these documents leaked from his library. Imagine how many more thousands of papers are in other people's libraries. And it's about how he appreciated the letter, how he learned so much at the Bilderberg conference. Quote, the Bilderberg conference gave me a real opportunity to learn and widen my horizons, and how it was great to know and visit with you there. So he's on the list. Walter P. Reuther, head of one of the biggest unions, UAW, based in Detroit. As they deindustrialized the United States, as they shut down Detroit and all the manufacturing there, they were doing things like price fixing, wage controls. He also headed up the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions. Free trade is not free trade, it's a block.
That's why the unions have supported NAFTA and GATT and the takeover of General Motors and $20+ billion to move the Cadillac and Volt plants overseas. This is treason.
You could call, you could be simple-minded and call free trade, but it's just like the OECD. It's coordinated policy. It's trade.
One-sided deals to consolidate power.
Yeah, and it's managed trade.
It's monopoly. Competition is a sin, as John D. Rockefeller
said. And it goes on to explain how Walter P. Reuther, head of UAW, was not just head of UAW, he was head of the International Conference on Free Trade Unions with more than 60 million workers across the world.
Let's just be honest. The reason we were leaked this is the union people now understand in government that they've been totally sold out for 40, 50 years.
Yeah, they don't like how they've been asked to play both sides, fight for union rights, fight for wages, allegedly, when in fact, if you study it, the Rockefellers, supposedly the top capitalists, managed the unions, they bought off the union leaders, they work with them, they meet with them annually.
And they have them vote for gun control, open borders, globalism, which undermines the people. And this is the head union guy at Bilderberg shelling everybody out in '66.
Yeah, and
Jimmy Hoffa wouldn't do it. He got cement shoes.
And he's setting up and trying to control the price wage board to manage prices and wages. He's also very concerned about foreign policy. He's trying to use his voting bloc to dictate Vietnam policy, of course, in 1966, in the thick of it. And if you look at later Bilderberg lists, you'll find heads of the AFL-CIO on there and other unions over the years. The unions are totally bought off, and they're just part of the system. It's that simple.